We are welcoming today Asher Genoot, CEO of Hut 8. Now, when I think about every single buzzword out there right now, Asher, whether it's AI, data centers, Bitcoin, Hut 8 seems to touch all of them. So just real quick, give us a 30 seconds on what your business does.
The underlying thing that drives all of those together is energy. And so the first layer of our business is energy. We're building a business and we call it a next generation energy infrastructure platform at the intersection of power and technology. And so the second layer in terms of how do we actually utilize that power is our digital infrastructure layer. Right now we're building data centers and physical infrastructure. Then our third layer is compute, where we own ASICs for Bitcoin mining and we own GPUs on the AI side of the business. And so if we think about our core operating business, it's three layers: power, digital infrastructure, and compute. And then we have a fun fourth layer that's not our operating layer, is more on our treasury management layer, which is a large Bitcoin position that we hold that is our strategic reserve.
Let's just drill in a little bit on the power side, Ash. So just clarify for us, is this power generation? Is this power allocation? Just give us a little bit more on the actual energy side of it.
So we do have power generation, but that's not the long-term thesis of the business. We own power generation when we need to power the underlying technologies, and I'll explain a little bit in what scenarios. But ultimately, our belief is as technology evolves and as it grows and advances, so too will its reliance on additional energy and consumption, both in terms of scale overall as an industry, but also in terms of each individual load becoming larger and larger. And so understanding where can you place those loads on the grid, whether it be front of the meter connected to a transmission line or behind the meter at a power plant or power generation facility directly, that is what we believe is really important, because how does the consumption of power help progress our grid, our energy ecosystem, and humanity? The World Bank came out with a great graph recently, and it showed how GDP per capita in every country and energy consumption per capita were directly correlated. So the more power that you consume per capita, the higher your GDP is. And so instead of being afraid of additional energy consumption, how do we do so in a way that helps grow our energy infrastructure and our grid? And so by bringing technology and power together, we believe that we can unlock something really valuable.
And how is AI playing a role in the unlock that you're executing against?
I think the biggest bottleneck for AI today is power. There's chips from NVIDIA, and that was a big bottleneck that was being discussed last year. Today is where do you actually place those chips in the data centers that can support it? And that's why companies who have access to power, who have platforms, who have the ability to procure power have been in the headlines, right? And so for us, any technology that requires power, I think we're going to end up being in the headlines. So that was and continues to be Bitcoin mining, that's AI data centers. And so we think about the business a little differently. We're just building digital infrastructure. It could be a tier 0 or tier 1 data center for ASIC compute that powers Bitcoin mining, or it can be a tier 3 data center for GPU compute that powers AI workloads.
We're going to come back to Bitcoin. I know we're dying to get to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But before we get there is a rumor that's floating around today that Hut 8 is partnering with Meta on a multi-billion-dollar AI data center project. Is that correct?
No comment.
Comments. Let's talk about your AI strategy more specifically, though, around large-scale data centers. It may not be Meta, but give us a sense for the kinds of clients you're working with today, what you've been doing to date, and where that you see the future going for Hut 8 in this arena.
The biggest demand that we've seen from the AI data center, so giving a little bit of background on the evolution of AI data centers and data centers for AI compute, when you think about customers, historically, if you were to have a customer that wanted 5, 10, 15, 50 megawatts of demand, that was a really, really big contract. When we're looking at opportunities today, we're talking multi-hundred megawatt demand profiles going up to a gigawatt at a single campus. And that's because the more GPUs you have at a single location clustered together, the larger you can make that singular computer to compute larger and larger LLMs for training for AI. And so the companies that can actually support that type of demand profile, that type of investments, tends to focus around the hyperscalers that everyone knows about, the Microsofts, AWS's, Oracle's, Amazon's, Metas of the world, and also large-scale enterprise. We believe there's also going to be an increase in demand from enterprise consumers as their workloads increase and as their workloads scale. And so we don't speculate on rumors that have gone out there, to your question earlier, but we did file a permit in Louisiana, which kind of sparked all of these conversations regarding a project that we're working on.
I'd be curious as to some of the states that you are working with. Are there some states like Louisiana or others that are more forward-leaning in trying to attract businesses like yours right now?
Most definitely. When we think about overall power markets, what we look for is what power markets have the dynamics to be able to support a large-scale load, and where in their transmission systems could we actually place them, right? And so we spent a lot of time with our transmission engineers and our energy team in order to look at what regions do we think are friendly, and then also what regions do we think can actually support this load and during what duration, what time period. So Louisiana, for example, is a really interesting state in our opinion, because you see demand going out of tier one markets like Virginia and Chicago and being willing to go to new markets. And Louisiana, earlier this year, the governor and the state just passed a data center tax exemption. And so that shows a willingness to bring in more data center customers and to build properties. In addition, we think that it sits in the middle of a couple of data center markets from a fiber perspective. It is a large producer, obviously, of fuel in the United States. And so you have a lot of LNG facilities and fuel generation. So power can be generated there as well. And so we think it's a really interesting market and is one of the many markets that we're looking at as we look at these opportunities.
You've talked a little bit about the demand for data centers. Asha, just looking at other news today, activist investor Starboard has taken a stake in Riot Platforms, recommending that it convert some of its Bitcoin mining facilities into space for data center usage. Talk to us about what Hut 8 is doing in Bitcoin mining right now, and why it is additive to, as opposed to taking away attention from, your data center servicing business.
When we look at our business today, if all the power access we had was our existing facilities, we'd be speaking a lot more about the conversion of those facilities to AI. Why? Because on a net present value perspective of a long-term 15-year lease with a hyperscale tenant, you are able to drive a lot more value from that individual megawatt. And there's a lot of financing that will support the growth of those megawatts as well. And so for us, I think where we're uniquely positioned is we have a lot of confidence in our team and our power development pipeline, where the question we ask ourselves is, we have new sites that can be energized in a short period of time. So instead of cannibalizing our existing cash flow, why don't we drive the demand of AI to those new projects? And at a point where we don't believe we have enough new projects to fulfill that demand, we can look at conversion opportunities as well. Not all sites can be converted, but a lot of sites can, especially as customer profiles and demand profiles on redundancy and power availability changes and evolves over time. And so for us, the Bitcoin mining side of the business is really interesting. When we think about our businesses, we don't think about it as Bitcoin mining versus AI data centers. We think about it as digital infrastructure versus compute. And so digital infrastructure, all we're doing is building different types of data centers with different types of redundancy. I think it was hard for the market and for people to understand that a Bitcoin mining facility was actually a data center. And so we announced this new site that we're building called Vega. It's a 205 megawatt data center. It's built to host ASIC computing chips, which is for Bitcoin mining. The site is really interesting because it's actually behind the meter at a wind farm, but also fully interconnected with the grid as well. And so you have this dynamic where you have this data center in between all of these wind turbines interconnected with the grid. What's really interesting about that site, and I think is going to start changing the way people think about these types of data centers, is we're building it direct liquid to cooled. And so similar to the AI data centers, it's not air cooled anymore. In addition, we had the manufacturer, Bitmain, build a rack design ASIC chip. And so now when you walk in, it's going to be data center halls, and the actual servers will be like a server, just like any other data center that has. So we're normalizing form factors as well. that data center is going to cool up to 200 kilowatts per rack. To remind everyone, the Blackwells are about 120 to 130 kilowatts per rack. These ASIC chips will be 180 kilowatts per rack, so we're adding buffer as well in our design. And that is where I think you'll start seeing people thinking about data centers as different types of redundancy from tier 0 to 1, 2, 3, rather than what the use case is, because, bless you, because the compute will be what drives the actual use case and the quality of the data center that you need to build from a reliability perspective. And I think there will be less conversation on what is the business, more so what type of data center are you building, who's a counterparty, what's a credit-worthy profile, and what are they doing with the compute potentially.
Can you walk us through one of the partnerships that you're involved with, Asher, and that is with Bitmain and GPU as a service? How's Hut 8 playing in that space?
Sure. So Bitmain's partnership that we have with them is regarding the Vega side that we shared in regards to them being a customer on that 205 megawatt facility for Bitcoin mining. We also have on the compute side our GPU as a service business. So that's a business that we incubated called highrise.ai. We have a CEO that runs that business and a whole management team. We also brought on an amazing CTO as well who ran the AI and cloud division in the IDF and just retired after 20 years of service. And so we're very excited by that. And that business is focused on building a GPU cloud focused on data security and privacy. And so they're in the process of launching their cloud. We already have 1,000 GPUs that we announced that we have a customer on a 5-year agreement on a bare metals agreement, but we're building our own cloud business there as well.
Let's get to the thing we've all been waiting to talk about, which is Bitcoin. How did Hut 8 end up in the position you're in now? Talk to us about the reserves of Bitcoin that you're holding. But was this opportunistic? Was this a strategic decision? Was it something that just happened to come out of the energy side of your business? What was the entry decision with respect to your Bitcoin holdings?
So the Bitcoin mining business, which we get exposure to through owning ASICs that produce the Bitcoin, and that's where we separate compute from digital infrastructure. And so we mine Bitcoin, and our cost to mine Bitcoin is much cheaper than the cost to buy Bitcoin, right? And so historically, I started a company called US Bitcoin Corp, and we merged with Hut 8 at the end of last year. I became CEO of Hut 8 earlier this year. Hut 8 had a large Bitcoin balance. It was one of the first publicly traded companies to hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And that has been a part of the Hut 8 story and the part of the reason why shareholders have bought the Hut 8 stock over time. When we merged together, I said, look, we have this Bitcoin stack. We're going to hold this Bitcoin stack, and we will continue to invest in the core operating business. And so I think today, when you look at where the markets are, I think most people would agree that there's a lot more upside and tailwind behind Bitcoin appreciation adoption relative to headwind. And so I think we are in a really great place. We're one of the top 10 largest holders of Bitcoin as a publicly traded company that I know of. And we are excited to continue to increase. I've kind of asked our shareholders a bit, both through investor conversations, through Twitter, on what people like us to increase, hold, or decrease our exposure into Bitcoin. Overwhelming amount of people have asked to increase, but I think overall we have a core underlying fundamental business that we really believe in our ability to scale a next generation energy infrastructure platform. And on the Bitcoin stack, we think it's a really great treasury management opportunity in order to have a Bitcoin reserve, be able to have the appreciation of Bitcoin, meanwhile building a really great underlying fundamental business.
And Asher, has Hut 8 been trading in and out of Bitcoin over the last couple of years?
So we've held, so as of this year when I took over, our initial kind of base of 9,100, which is our strategic reserve, we've held. The Bitcoin that we've mined net new, we had basically sold at times to fund operating costs and energy costs and so forth. And at times we've held as well. So I think that has more evolved based on our decision. Do we hold cash or do we hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet? And that will continue to be agile as we make investments into the strategic reserves versus have cash to invest in the operating business.
Bitcoin's just gone past $100,000. What is the Hut 8 house view on where Bitcoin goes to?
I think our view is that we think it's going to go a lot higher over a long period of time, and that's why we continue to hold exposure to Bitcoin. And so our belief is we're bullish on Bitcoin, we're bullish on the growth of Bitcoin, and ultimately we need to decide between opportunities to invest in the core operating business and continue to hold a strong strategic reserve and being on the Bitcoin standard.
We'll get there to talk about strategic reserves generally, but I'm going to push you again on this one. Are you in the camp, this camp is out there, that Bitcoin goes to $1 million? Are you up in that?
I've never been one that puts a Bitcoin price target, because my comment has always been, if I knew where Bitcoin price would have gone, I would have just bought Bitcoin and done nothing else. And we decided to mine Bitcoin because we could mine at a discount. And so we can buy Bitcoin at a cheaper cost than that's available. I think today we do have conviction by holding our Bitcoin that will continue to appreciate. And so how do we gain exposure to that appreciation? We can mine it. We can procure and purchase more Bitcoin, and we can have cash flows. And instead of holding them in cash, we can hold them in Bitcoin as well. And so we're bullish on Bitcoin, which is why we continue to hold it on our balance sheet. And we've obviously done well in terms of its appreciation this year by holding it thus far.
Do you think that more companies, Asha, or even the government are going to set up strategic Bitcoin reserves? You saw Microsoft has actually voted down a proposal Michael Saylor had actually presented to the board to put that forward as an idea. Do you think more companies are going to do what you've been doing at Hut 8, especially those that are in the energy generation or energy management sector?
I think yes, overall. I don't necessarily know if it'll be energy specific. If you think about other Bitcoin mining companies, I think yes. Other companies that have exposure to this industry, I think yes. But I do believe more companies will start holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet as a mechanism of managing their treasury.
So if not, with the Microsofts of the world, if not more adoption of having Bitcoin reserves, certainly the trend we have seen is a growing dependency between energy and technology companies. Amazon, for example, we saw with its push into trying to make sure it can capture nuclear capabilities. There is news that Microsoft is leading a $9 billion energy coalition. How do you see that trend progressing in 2025? And how could that benefit or impact Hut 8?
Energy is the key. Our whole life, everything we do is fueled by the underlying energy ecosystem in the grid. And so our belief is these companies have to figure out the energy problem, because otherwise they're not going to be able to scale their AI ambitions. And so I think it's a natural progression. We're very excited because we think we're right at that intersection. That's what we built the company on. That's what we will continue to focus on and scale on. And as I mentioned, I think every new technology out there, eventually it'll come back down to, is there enough power and energy out there to power this and evolve this technology, which is why I think you'll continue to see Hut 8 at that intersection over a long period of time.
Asha Genoot, great insights. Thank you so much for sharing with us what Hut 8 is doing. That's it, folks, from the Leading Indicator. Come on back.